Daniel pushed the mop across the shiny floor, the smell of cleaning fluid sharp in the air. His shoulders ached from hours of work, but he kept moving. The alien executives had left the boardroom minutes ago, their laughter echoing down the long glass corridor. They never looked at him. To them, he was invisible. A human janitor in gray uniform, holding a mop and bucket. They didn't care that he had a daughter waiting for him at home. They didn't care that he once dreamed of something greater. They only saw someone who swept floors. The boardroom was huge, walls covered with glowing panels that displayed alien charts and symbols. He had learned long ago to keep his eyes low and his mouth shut. A man who cleaned floors wasn't supposed to be curious. But Daniel couldn't help glancing at the alien text left glowing on one of the panels. Strange loops, hard angles, and twisting lines that most humans could never read. He had studied them in secret once, before war and tragedy pushed him into this life. He wiped the panel with his cloth, and as his eyes traced the words, his mind translated them as easily as breathing. He sighed softly and moved the mop again, the sound of water sloshing in the bucket filling the empty hall. For everyone else, this was the end of the day. For him, it was only the middle. After this shift, he had to take the tram across the city, climb 5 flights of stairs, and tuck his little girl into bed. Lily always waited for him, no matter how late. She would sit by the window, her small face pressed against the cold glass, hoping to see her father's shadow walking home. He paused to stretch his back, glancing at the long table where alien executives had argued moments earlier. They had spoken of humans like pests, weak, slow, simple. He had heard it all. He always pretended he didn't understand, nodding politely while mopping around their chairs. But inside, the words burned like fire. He wanted to tell them that humans were not weak, that they had survived wars, storms, and hunger. He wanted to shout that even a janitor had pride. But shouting would not feed Lily. So he stayed silent. A small datapad had fallen from one of the alien satchels, lying close to the table leg. It blinked softly, alien text scrolling across the screen. Daniel bent down and picked it up. His heart skipped. The words were written in one of the rare dialects, ancient and poetic, words he had only seen in secret books. Without thinking, he whispered the translation to himself, his lips moving like he was reciting a prayer. The datapad spoke of trade numbers, security codes, and a private message of insult about humans. His voice was calm, steady, perfect in accent. The air seemed to freeze. A sound behind him made his hand tighten on the mop. He turned slightly. An alien executive had walked back into the room, looking for his datapad. His wide golden eyes locked onto Daniel's face, and his ridged ears twitched at the words still hanging in the air. Daniel realized too late that he had spoken out loud. For a moment, there was silence. Then the alien stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing on the floor. "You?" he said, switching into the human tongue with a sharp accent. "What did you just say?" Daniel's throat felt dry. He should have lied. He should have dropped the datapad and apologized, but the words came anyway, flowing out smoother than water. He repeated the translation in the alien's own language, perfect pronunciation, every tone correct. His voice did not shake. The alien's jaw tightened. His hand twitched as if ready to call security, but he didn't. Instead, he stared at Daniel as though seeing him for the first time. For years, Daniel had been a shadow with a mop. Now, in that single moment, he was something else. The datapad buzzed, demanding a code. Daniel's eyes flicked over the glowing words. He whispered the response without meaning to. The pad unlocked. The alien's eyes widened further, disbelief flashing across his face. Daniel placed the datapad on the table and straightened his back. He forced his expression blank, as though nothing had happened. But inside, his chest pounded. He had just revealed his secret. Years of silence, of swallowing words, had been broken. The alien stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Who taught you this?" His tone was not anger. It was shock, almost fear. Daniel gripped his mop harder. He thought of Lily waiting at the window. He thought of food on the table, rent barely paid, and the risk of losing everything. He wanted to say nothing, but silence was no longer possible. His secret was out. "I taught myself," he answered simply, in the alien tongue. The alien executive took a step back, his face pale. His golden eyes darted around the room, as if the walls might be listening. "No human should speak like this," he whispered. "Not even our own scholars." Daniel lowered his eyes again, pretending to return to work, his mop sliding across the polished floor. But the silence in the room was thick. The alien clutched his datapad and walked out quickly, his boots echoing like thunder. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the mop. He looked at the glowing reflection of the alien text on the floor, his own face shining faintly in it. He had tried to stay invisible. He had tried to be just a janitor. But now someone knew. Far away in the city, Lily sat by the window, waiting for her father. She would see him tonight. But Daniel knew his world had just changed. What had slipped from his mouth so easily could not be taken back. Someone had heard, and someone would tell others. The mop's movement slowed as the weight of it all pressed down on him. For years, he had been nobody. Tonight, in one careless moment, he had become something that could not be ignored. The next morning, the building was alive with whispers. Workers of different alien species moved through the glass halls, but their voices lowered when Daniel passed by with his mop and bucket. They had heard something. Eyes that once slid over him without care now lingered a second longer. The human janitor was no longer invisible. He felt the weight of their stares on his back, the silence that followed him like a shadow. Daniel kept his head down, sweeping the long corridor. He had survived many things by pretending he didn't hear, by being smaller than he was. But this time was different. Something had changed in the air, like the static before a storm. He felt it most when the lift doors opened and two alien clerks stepped out, speaking in low voices. They glanced at him, then quickly looked away, their tails twitching nervously. By the end of his shift, Daniel knew the story had spread. The janitor who spoke fluent alien. He could almost hear the words bouncing through the walls, traveling from office to office, from one floor to another. He cursed himself silently, wondering why he hadn't just stayed quiet last night. He had survived by hiding his knowledge, not showing it. Now the secret was out. In the cafeteria, he noticed alien workers glancing at him. One brave young clerk approached him as he mopped near the tables. She had bright silver skin and eyes like liquid glass. She hesitated, then spoke in her native tongue, asking him for the time. Without thinking, Daniel answered perfectly in the same language. Her jaw dropped. The sound of her gasp carried across the room. Other workers turned to stare. Daniel felt his stomach twist, but it was too late. His skill had been confirmed again. By evening, as he prepared to go home, he was stopped by a tall alien executive with violet scales covering his face. The alien didn't speak in common tongue, but in a regional dialect most humans had never even heard. It was fast, sharp, almost a test. Daniel froze, the words filling his head. Then, like instinct, he replied. Not only did he reply, he corrected the alien's grammar. The executive blinked at him in disbelief before walking away without a word. Daniel's hands tightened on the mop handle. He hated this attention. Attention was dangerous. It could take away everything he had built for his daughter. He hurried to finish his work and left as quickly as he could, but even in the tram ride home, he thought he felt eyes watching him. When he reached the small apartment, Lily ran to him with a bright smile, hugging his legs tightly. "Papa, you're late," she said softly. Her tiny hands clutched his shirt, and her warm presence grounded him. He smiled back, but the storm in his mind didn't calm. He tucked her into bed later, and she begged for a story. Instead of reading from the old human books, he sang her a lullaby. Not a human one, but an alien song he had learned years ago. The soft notes wrapped around her like a blanket, and her eyes closed slowly, her breathing deep and calm. He didn't notice the small security drone hovering outside the cracked window, its lens glowing faintly red. The drone recorded every word, every note, sending it back to the building servers. The alien lullaby leaving the lips of a human janitor was more shocking than anything else. The next day at work, he felt it immediately. Supervisors didn't bark orders at him as before. Instead, they watched him carefully, as though he was something dangerous. Two alien guards stood near the lobby, and he caught them whispering in their own tongue, glancing at him with suspicion. He could hear the words clearly. How can a human know so much? Who taught him? Daniel gritted his teeth. He wanted to shout that nobody had taught him, that he had learned alone, in silence, with nothing but stolen books and sleepless nights. But he didn't speak. He only pushed the mop, one step at a time. Yet the whispers wouldn't stop. By mid-afternoon, an older alien approached him. His horns were long and bent with age, his robe rich with embroidered symbols. This one was no ordinary worker. He dropped a handful of papers deliberately, written in the old script of his people. Daniel bent down and picked them up. His eyes traced the symbols, and the translation filled his mind uninvited. Before he realized, he read one of the lines out loud. The old alien froze, then gave Daniel a long, unreadable look. He said nothing, only took the papers and walked away. But Daniel knew the message had spread to even higher levels. That night, he walked home with his head low. The streets felt different, as if someone followed him. He turned corners quickly, but the sensation stayed. His heart raced until he finally reached the small apartment, locking the door behind him. Lily was waiting, sitting by the window as always. She waved when she saw him and rushed to hug him. Her innocence calmed him again, but fear still gnawed at his heart. When Lily went to sleep, Daniel sat by the window, staring out at the alien city lights. The towers glowed like stars, and the sky hummed with distant ships. He wondered if tomorrow they would still let him mop the floors, or if security would drag him away for knowing too much. Somewhere inside the corporation, in a dark conference room, executives replayed the footage of Daniel singing the alien lullaby to his daughter. Their voices were hushed, serious. "This is not normal," one said. "A human should not know this song." Another replied, "Perhaps he is dangerous, or perhaps he is useful." Daniel did not know that decisions were already being made about him. To him, he was still just a father, still a janitor. But the galaxy was beginning to see something else. Daniel had just finished scrubbing the marble tiles in the lobby when a sharp voice called his name. He froze, the mop dripping water on the spotless floor. No one in this building ever spoke his name. Usually it was you or janitor. But now, an alien guard in silver armor stood before him, golden eyes fixed. "The executives request your presence," the guard said flatly. Daniel's chest tightened. His first thought was Lily. If he lost this job, what would happen to her? His second thought was the whisper of alien words he had let slip, the lullaby, the translation. He realized too late this was not about cleaning floors anymore. Slowly, he put the mop aside and followed the guard, his boots squeaking faintly on the polished surface. The elevator doors slid open, and he was led upward, higher than he had ever gone before. His work usually kept him in the lower halls, far away from the executive chamber. The ride was silent except for the hum of the lift. Daniel's reflection stared back at him in the glass, tired eyes, rough hands, the uniform of a man invisible. Yet today, someone had noticed. When the doors opened, the air was cooler, sharper. The corridor glowed with blue light, walls etched with alien carvings. Guards lined the way, their weapons strapped to their backs. Daniel swallowed hard as the chamber doors parted, revealing the vast room within. The alien executives sat in a half circle, robes flowing, horns and scales glimmering in the light. At the center was the CEO, taller than the rest, his skin like polished stone. His eyes followed Daniel's every step as he entered. Daniel's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He had been in this room many times to clean after meetings, but never like this. Never with all eyes watching him. "Human," the CEO said, his deep voice echoing against the walls. "Step forward." Daniel obeyed, his feet heavy. He wanted to vanish, to be the ghost they once ignored. But that time was over. The CEO spoke again, this time in an alien dialect Daniel recognized from ancient texts. It was formal, rigid, and difficult. Daniel's instinct told him to stay silent, but the words filled his mind too easily. He answered back, perfect in tone. The chamber went quiet. The executives exchanged glances, some frowning, others leaning forward with interest. The CEO's eyes narrowed. He switched dialects, faster, harsher. Daniel answered again, not stumbling once. Then another voice spoke from the side, this time using a dialect Daniel had only seen once in an old tattered scroll. His tongue shaped the answer as though he had spoken it for years. Gasps filled the chamber. One executive muttered, "Impossible." Another hissed, "No human could know this." Daniel's hands clenched at his sides, but his face stayed calm. He stood straighter than before, meeting their eyes. He felt the weight of years, the stolen books, the late nights, the hunger, the sacrifices. All of it had led here. The CEO leaned forward, his stone-like face unreadable. "Who are you really?" Daniel's voice was quiet. "I am only a father, a janitor." The words seemed to anger some of them. A thin alien with curved horns slammed his hand on the table. "Do not insult us. No janitor knows the sacred tongues of 3 worlds." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to tell them the truth, that he had learned in secret, in darkness, with nothing but his own stubborn will. But he stayed silent. His silence spoke louder than excuses. The CEO tapped a clawed finger against the table. "Enough," he said. His eyes bored into Daniel. Then, in the sharpest dialect of all, a tongue so rare it had been nearly forgotten, he asked, "If you are what you claim, then tell us, what does this mean?" The symbols flashed across a screen beside him, an ancient phrase of law written in twisting glyphs. Daniel's heart stopped. It was a treaty clause. The words looked simple, but he saw the danger immediately. If read incorrectly, the line would give one empire the right to wage war, while the other side believed it promised peace. Daniel inhaled slowly. He spoke, carefully shaping each word, giving the true meaning of the text. His voice was steady, deliberate. When he finished, silence fell again. Every eye in the chamber widened. His explanation was not only correct, but revealed a mistake that had gone unnoticed for decades. The CEO slammed his claw on the table, but not in anger. His voice shook the chamber. "He is right. We nearly walked into war because of this." The other executives broke into shouts, disbelief and fear spreading like fire. Daniel's stomach twisted. He hadn't meant to reveal so much, but he had saved them from disaster, and now they knew his mind was sharper than they ever imagined. The CEO rose from his seat. His tall figure cast a shadow across Daniel. "You will not leave here tonight as a janitor," he said, voice like stone grinding. "You will come with me, tonight." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to protest, to tell them he had a daughter waiting at home by the window, but the words froze in his throat. Guards stepped forward, not threatening, but expectant. The choice was gone. He nodded slowly, his hands trembling by his sides. The chamber buzzed with voices, some furious, some eager. But one truth had become clear. Daniel could no longer be invisible. He was no longer just a man with a mop. As he was led out of the chamber, the CEO's final words rang in his ears, heavy as chains. "From this night forward, your life will never be the same." Daniel sat in the corner of the chamber, his hands resting tightly on his knees. The room was filled with alien nobles, their robes glowing faintly with threads of gold and silver. Their faces were sharp, unreadable, and their voices rolled like thunder as they argued over trade routes, weapons, and secret alliances. He had been brought there not as a cleaner but as a witness, though no one explained why. The mop that once gave him a reason to be in such rooms was gone. Now he sat in silence, his heart pounding, pretending not to listen. But he could not help it. Every word etched itself into his mind. They were speaking in 3 different dialects, switching quickly to confuse spies or outsiders. To anyone else, the sound would have been a storm of nonsense. To Daniel, it was clear as glass. He understood every deal, every hidden threat inside their words. And it frightened him. One noble, a tall alien with bright crimson scales, slammed his claw against the table. "The treaty is binding," he shouted in a tongue so old it had almost vanished. "To break it is war." Another responded in a smoother dialect, twisting the words so the meaning changed. Daniel's lips pressed together as he realized what the second alien had done. He had misquoted the line. It wasn't an accident. It was a manipulation that could send armies to burn entire colonies. Daniel's fists clenched. He had promised himself to stay quiet, to remain a shadow, but his chest burned with the weight of truth. Finally, when the red-scaled noble leaned back, satisfied, Daniel spoke. His voice was calm, steady, carrying in the silence of the chamber. "That is not what the treaty says." Every head turned at once. The nobles stared at him, their eyes narrowing, their lips curling in disbelief. One laughed bitterly, a harsh sound. "The janitor dares to speak?" But Daniel did not shrink. He rose to his feet slowly, his heart hammering, but his words unshaken. "You quoted it wrong," he said in their own language. "The clause does not allow war. It forbids it. Your words would cause bloodshed where none is meant." The chamber exploded with noise. Nobles shouted over each other, some in anger, some in fear. The crimson-scaled alien's face twisted with rage. "Silence!" he barked. "This human should not even be here." The CEO lifted a hand, and the room fell quiet again. His stone-like face turned toward Daniel. "Explain," he said simply. Daniel swallowed but stood taller. He repeated the original words of the treaty in the old tongue, his pronunciation flawless. Then he gave the true meaning, word by word, exposing the false twist that had been used moments earlier. His explanation cut through the tension like a blade. The nobles listened, unwilling but unable to deny it. When he finished, silence wrapped the room. Some stared at him with awe, others with cold hatred. The CEO leaned back, his eyes sharp. "If you are right, you may have prevented a war," he said. Daniel's stomach turned at the weight of it. He never wanted this power. He only wanted to feed his daughter, to keep her safe. Now his words were shaping the fates of entire worlds. The crimson-scaled alien hissed, his claws scraping the table. "This is dangerous. A human should not hold such knowledge. He could twist words to his own advantage. He should be removed before he becomes a threat." Daniel's heart raced, but before fear could grip him, he thought of Lily. He thought of her waiting by the window, her little hands clutching his shirt, her soft voice asking for stories. That memory gave him courage. He met the alien's gaze without flinching. Truth is not a threat. Lies are. Gasps filled the room again. Some of the nobles whispered among themselves, their expressions shifting. The CEO's eyes studied Daniel carefully, weighing him like a weapon. Finally, the leader spoke. "He stays." His voice rumbled through the chamber, ending all argument. "And he listens." From that moment, Daniel was no longer allowed to leave when meetings began. He stood at the edge of the chamber, silent but alert, absorbing secrets meant for the highest circles. They argued about armies, about bribes, about hidden betrayals. Every time Daniel heard a mistranslation or a trick of words, his chest tightened. He knew he could correct them, that he could stop wars and greed from twisting truth. But he also knew that every time he spoke, he painted a larger target on his back. That night, when the chamber finally emptied, Daniel walked home under the alien city's glowing towers. His steps were heavy, his mind racing. The mop and bucket no longer felt like his shield. Now, secrets filled his hands like fire. When he reached the apartment, Lily was waiting by the window, as always. She rushed to him, laughing, and threw her arms around him. He hugged her tightly, closing his eyes. She didn't know the danger he now carried. She only knew he was her father. Later, as she fell asleep, Daniel sat by her side, staring at her peaceful face. He whispered softly, in the alien tongue he once used only in secret. "I will keep you safe, no matter what." His voice cracked, but his eyes burned with quiet determination. He had entered the chamber as a janitor. He had left as something far more dangerous. A man who could see through lies. A man who could change the course of history with a single sentence. And he knew the nobles would not forgive him for it. Daniel felt the weight of many eyes on him whenever he entered the building now. The mop and bucket in his hands no longer made him invisible. Some alien workers greeted him with cautious respect, while others lowered their voices when he passed, whispering in languages they thought he could not hear. But he heard every word. Some were filled with curiosity, some with envy, and some with hatred. The walls of the great corporation seemed to carry his name like a warning. At first, Daniel thought his life might improve. He had been given better food in the cafeteria, and a guard once nodded at him as if acknowledging something more than a janitor. But small changes soon turned into something darker. He noticed groups of executives whispering too long when he walked by. He saw sharp glances, flickers of fear and anger hidden behind fake smiles. Not everyone welcomed a human with power. Some of them wanted him erased before his voice could change more than treaties. The first sign came one night as he walked home. The city's neon lights reflected on the wet streets, and he carried a small bag of food for Lily. He noticed footsteps behind him. When he turned a corner, the sound followed. He glanced at the glass of a shop window and saw a figure moving in the shadows. Daniel's stomach tightened. He quickened his pace, his grip on the bag tightening. The footsteps sped up too. Suddenly, a hand grabbed him from behind, pulling him into a narrow alley. A masked alien, cloaked and armed with a short blade, hissed in a harsh tongue. "You should have stayed quiet, human." Another figure appeared, blocking the exit. Daniel's heart pounded. His mind screamed for Lily. The first attacker lunged, but Daniel reacted faster than he thought possible. He grabbed the only thing in reach, an old metal pipe leaning against the wall. His hands moved as if guided by instinct, but his words struck harder than the pipe. In the alien's own tongue, he barked a command, one their soldiers used in training. The alien froze for a moment, startled by hearing his own orders thrown back at him in perfect tone. That hesitation was enough. Daniel swung the pipe, knocking the blade from his attacker's hand. The second alien rushed forward. Daniel sidestepped, jabbing the pipe into the figure's side. He didn't fight with skill, but with desperation, with the strength of a father who could not afford to die. In minutes, both attackers stumbled away, clutching their wounds, hissing curses as they disappeared into the night. Daniel's chest heaved, his arms trembled, but he was alive. When he finally reached home, Lily was waiting by the window, her face lighting up when she saw him. He forced a smile, hugged her tightly, and tucked her into bed. But his mind would not rest. Someone had sent those attackers. This was not random. The next day at work confirmed his fears. As he mopped the hall, he overheard two executives whispering, "The janitor is dangerous. He corrects our leaders in front of everyone. If we let him stay, what power will he take next?" The other replied, "He must be silenced before he becomes more than a voice." Daniel's blood turned cold. He had thought saving the treaty would protect him, but instead it had painted a target on his back. Still, he could not stop. That afternoon, when another meeting took place, he stood quietly in the chamber as nobles argued. Once again, he caught a twist in the translation, a small one, but one that would have robbed entire villages of resources. He corrected it, his calm voice exposing the lie. Gasps filled the chamber. And again, eyes turned toward him, some with respect, others with hatred sharp as knives. Later that day, the CEO summoned him privately. The great alien's voice was low but steady. "You have made enemies," he said. "There are those who would see you dead. But you have also saved us. Your daughter's safety depends on your silence or your courage. You must decide." Daniel's chest tightened. He thought of Lily, her small hand in his, her laugh when he told her bedtime stories. He had worked so hard to keep her safe, to live unnoticed. But silence would no longer protect them. The truth was out, and truth could not be buried again. As he left the CEO's office, he saw Lily playing in the lobby with another child, a small alien girl with golden eyes. They laughed together, innocent of the danger around them. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to smile. His daughter was happy, and that gave him strength. But when he looked up, he caught sight of the crimson-scaled noble watching him from across the hall, eyes burning with hatred. The noble turned and whispered to his guards before leaving. Daniel knew then that another attack would come, and next time it might not be so easy to survive. That night, as he lay awake, Daniel held Lily close. His mind raced with possibilities. Escape, hiding, or facing what was coming. He remembered the words he had said in the chamber. Truth is not a threat. Lies are. He knew now those words had made him powerful. But power always drew enemies. In the distance, outside their window, the city glowed like a sea of fire. Somewhere in that light, plots were being made against him. Daniel closed his eyes and whispered a promise in the alien tongue, his voice barely a breath. "They will not take you from me. Not you." Lily stirred softly in her sleep, pressing her head against his chest. And Daniel lay awake, knowing tomorrow would bring more whispers, more enemies, and perhaps more blood. The night was quiet in the great towers, but Daniel felt the danger before he saw it. He had stayed late, cleaning the high floors after an important meeting. The corridors were empty, the glass walls reflecting the city lights. His mop glided over the smooth floor, water rippling softly in the bucket. He told himself it was just another shift, that he would finish soon and go home to Lily. But the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Someone was watching him. The sound came first, a faint step that didn't belong to him. He turned his head slightly, catching a shadow moving at the edge of the corridor. His grip tightened on the mop handle. The shadow grew, splitting into two figures, then three. They stepped into the light, faces hidden under masks, armor dark as stone. Each carried short, curved weapons that glimmered under the lamps. Daniel's throat went dry. He was not surprised. He had known this moment would come. Enemies had been whispering for days, their eyes filled with hate when he corrected lies in the chamber. Now they had chosen to strike when the halls were empty. One of the masked figures hissed in a low alien tongue. "The janitor must vanish tonight." The others raised their blades. Daniel's chest pounded, but he forced his breath steady. Slowly, he lifted his mop, holding it like a staff. He had no training, no armor, but he had survived worse than this. He had survived war, hunger, and the burden of raising a child alone. And tonight, he would survive again. The first attacker lunged. Daniel twisted, swinging the mop handle with all his strength. The wood cracked against the alien's ribs, sending him stumbling back. Another charged from behind, but Daniel spun and jabbed the mop's end into his stomach. The alien grunted in pain, but more kept coming. The sound of steel scraping against marble filled the corridor. Daniel's heart roared in his chest, but his mind stayed sharp. As one alien raised his blade high, Daniel shouted in their own tongue. A command, sharp and precise, the kind used in military drills. The alien froze mid-swing, his training instincts kicking in before he realized who had spoken. That single pause saved Daniel's life. He struck the alien across the head, dropping him to the floor. But there were too many. He backed against the wall, his arms aching from every strike, his breath ragged. He thought of Lily waiting at home, and that gave him strength to keep fighting. Yet he knew he could not hold out forever. Then a new sound thundered down the hall, the heavy steps of armored guards. The attackers hesitated, their heads turning. And in that moment, the CEO himself appeared, flanked by soldiers. His tall figure loomed, his stone-like skin glowing under the blue lights. His eyes locked on the scene. The janitor, with a mop handle in his hands, standing over two beaten attackers, facing three more without fear. Enough, the CEO's voice rumbled like an earthquake. The masked aliens froze. The guards rushed forward, forcing the attackers to the ground, tearing off their masks. Daniel leaned on his mop, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. The CEO stepped closer, his gaze heavy. "You fought like a soldier," the CEO said, his voice deep. "And you spoke words that made trained assassins hesitate. Who taught you this?" Daniel shook his head, still gasping for breath. "No one. I learned on my own." The CEO studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then you are more dangerous than they are, because your strength comes not from training, but from will." The defeated attackers were dragged away, their curses echoing through the hall. Silence filled the space again, broken only by Daniel's breathing. The CEO's eyes narrowed as he looked at the mop still gripped tightly in Daniel's hands. "This man is no janitor," the CEO declared, his voice carrying through the corridor. Guards and staff who had gathered nearby stared in shock. "This man is proof that humans are not weak. He has seen through lies, corrected our truths, and now he has defended himself against assassins." Daniel lowered the mop slowly, his arms trembling. He did not want this attention, but it was too late. His secret was burned into the open. "You will not be hidden anymore," the CEO said firmly. "From this day forward, you represent humanity in this house." Gasps echoed among the staff. Some bowed their heads, others whispered nervously. Daniel's heart pounded harder than ever. He thought of Lily waiting by the window, expecting her father to return home tired but safe. Now, everything had changed. He was not just her father, not just a man with a mop. He had been dragged into something greater, something dangerous. He wanted to speak, to refuse, to beg for his simple life back. But his voice would not come. The CEO had spoken, and his words carried the weight of law. Guards stood at Daniel's side now, not as enemies, but as escorts. He had been pulled from the shadows into the light, whether he wanted it or not. That night, when he finally returned home, Lily ran to him, laughing, her little arms around his waist. He held her close, burying his face in her hair, whispering softly, "I will always protect you." She smiled, not knowing what had happened, not knowing her father's life was no longer his own. Daniel sat by the window after she slept, staring at the glowing city. He was no longer invisible. The CEO's words rang in his ears again and again. This man is no janitor. He knew his life, and Lily's would never be simple again. The path ahead was full of enemies, dangers, and choices that could shape not only their future, but perhaps the fate of all humans. He gripped the mop handle still leaning beside him, the wood scarred and cracked from battle. It was no longer just a tool. It was a reminder of who he had been and of who he had now become. Daniel stood before the council chamber, the light of 100 alien symbols glowing across the high walls. His heart pounded as he waited to step forward. The CEO's words from days before echoed in his mind. "You will represent humanity." He had not asked for this, but now he was the voice of his people. No longer a shadow in gray uniform, no longer just a janitor with a mop. Every eye in the chamber watched him, and every whisper carried his name. Lily's small hand had touched his cheek that morning when he left. "Papa, don't be late," she had said with a smile. He carried her voice with him now, letting it steady his nerves. For her, he would face this. For her, he would stand before rulers who once thought humans were nothing. The chamber filled with nobles, their robes shining like fire and water, their horns and scales catching the light. Voices swirled around him, heavy with doubt. "Why let a human speak?" one hissed. "He is a janitor, not a diplomat," another spat. Yet others leaned forward in curiosity. They had seen him correct treaties, expose lies, and fight off assassins. Some feared him, but some respected him. When the room fell silent, Daniel walked to the center. His boots clicked softly on the marble. He raised his head, his voice calm but strong. He began not in the common tongue, but in one of the oldest dialects, the one nobles used for sacred law. The words poured from him, flawless, steady, carrying meaning across cultures. The chamber gasped. Some nobles leaned forward, their jaws slack. A human speaking with such precision was unheard of. Then Daniel shifted to another dialect, then another, weaving them together like threads of cloth. He spoke of truth, of unity, of the danger in twisting words to serve greed. His voice rang like iron, but his eyes stayed soft, for he thought of Lily with every phrase. For a moment, the chamber was still. But then whispers rose again, harsher this time. "This is dangerous," a crimson-scaled noble barked. "A human with such knowledge can sway empires. He should be silenced before he poisons us." Others murmured in agreement, fear sharpening their voices. The CEO raised a hand, but before order could return, Daniel felt it, a chill, a wrongness in the room. His eyes swept the chamber and caught it. A figure at the back, cloaked in shadows, standing too still, too quiet. The figure's hand slipped into its robes, pulling free a weapon shaped like a silver claw. Daniel's breath caught. He moved before thinking, shouting in the assassin's own tongue, "Stop!" The word cracked like thunder. The cloaked figure hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. Then the assassin charged. Chaos erupted. Guards shouted, nobles screamed, the sound of steel rang in the air. Daniel dove forward, tackling the assassin before the weapon could strike. They crashed to the floor, the weapon skidding across marble. The assassin hissed in rage, striking with clawed hands. Daniel fought back with raw strength, blocking and pushing, his fists bruised but unyielding. The chamber's guards rushed in, dragging the assassin away, but Daniel's chest still heaved from the struggle. He rose slowly, his clothes torn, his knuckles bleeding. His voice carried across the room. "This is what fear creates. Lies, hatred, and shadows. If we want peace, then truth must guide us, not silence." The room fell quiet again, but this silence was different. Some nobles stared at him as if seeing not a human, but something greater. The CEO's stone-like face softened for the first time, his deep voice cutting through the stillness. "You have shown us more than skill. You have shown courage. You have shown honor. You will not be erased. From this day, you speak for humanity." Daniel's breath caught. The words sealed his place, carved it into law. He was no longer a janitor, no longer invisible. He was a voice that could not be ignored. That night, as he returned home, the city lights stretched like rivers of fire beneath the towers. When he opened the apartment door, Lily rushed into his arms, laughing as she wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. He held her close, burying his face in her hair. She smelled of soap and warmth, so small, so innocent. "Papa," she whispered, "are you tired?" "Yes," he said softly, kissing her head. "But I will never be too tired for you." He tucked her into bed, humming the alien lullaby she loved. As her eyes closed, he sat by the window, staring out at the night sky. Ships drifted between the stars, and somewhere out there, enemies were still plotting. He knew more attacks would come, more whispers, more dangers. But he also knew one thing. He could not go back to being invisible. He had stepped into the light, and he would not leave it. Daniel tightened his fist, feeling the sting in his bruised knuckles. He thought of the words he had spoken in the chamber, of the assassin's blade, of the council's silence. A janitor had stood against lies, had spoken truth, had fought with nothing but will. And in that truth, he had become something none of them expected. He whispered softly, his voice almost a vow. "They will learn. They will see. Humanity will not be ignored." The stars outside glimmered like watchful eyes, and Daniel sat tall in the shadows of his small home, no longer a man unseen, but a father, a fighter, and now a symbol. His life had changed forever, and the galaxy would never be the same.